Lately, I've had a lot of students ask me, what's a perfect square number? Well, the short answer is it is the answer to the problem when you square an integer. For example, if I take the integer 3 and I square it, I get 9. 9 is a perfect square. It's the answer to a problem when you square an integer. Alright, so that's the short answer. But why do we call this a perfect square? Well, let's think about it for a second. A perfect square, geometrically, should be a square. Alright, so let's make a square. Now, this number tells us what the length of each side is. It's a square that's 3, and when we square 3, we get 3 times 3. So, it's a square that's 3 by 3. If I draw a picture of this, and I draw on my 3 by 3 square, and you count the units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the area is 9. 9 units squared makes my perfect square. Alright, so this is analytically what we're talking about when we are talking about a perfect square. So I can make a list of perfect squares by doing this. If I square 0, I get 0. If I square 1, I get 1. If I square 2, I get 4. All of these are perfect squares. Alright, and there are a lot more, of course. So you could go on and on and on. So here's my question. Is 6 a perfect square? Alright, how could we figure this out? Well, we could take 6 units, or we could break 6 down. 6 is 2 times 3, right? So if I draw this, what I end up with is 2 units on this side, and 3 units here, 3, and that makes 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 square units. Is this a square? Nope, not a square. So, is 6 a perfect square? No, it's a rectangle. So, it's not a perfect square. We don't call it a perfect square. So, how do we figure out if a number is a perfect square? Well, what we can do is we can use a test. Okay, so let's check these numbers out. Let's take 15, 36, 20, 49, and 100. Alright, now, if you think of 15, 15 is 3 by 5. Well, we know right now a 3 by 5 is going to be rectangular, so that's not a perfect square. 36, that's going to be 6 times 6. Aha, so 36 is a perfect square because it is the answer to 6 squared. Alright, cool. What about 20? 20 is 4 times 5. Well, 4 times 5, that's not a perfect square, that's a rectangle. So again, that's not going to work. And what about 49? 49, aha, 7 times 7. So yeah, this is a perfect square because a 7 by 7 would be a perfect square, not a rectangle. And this is 7 squared is 49. It's the answer to what you get when you square an integer. And the same with 100. It's going to be 10 times 10. So, if you're asked, is it a perfect square? You have to use some kind of a test. Often it's nice to make your prime factorization tree. That's an easy way to do it. The other nice thing you can do is you can actually just use your calculator and try taking the square root. So another thing we could have done here is we could have said, alright, well, let's take the square root of 15. What do you get when you take the square root of 15? If you get a nice integer number, we get 3.87. Oh my gosh, look at that horrible thing. It looks like it's never ending, never repeating. It just fills up the entire calculator screen, so we have to assume that it never ends. So this is approximately, what was it? 3.8729, 3.8729, and so forth. This is called irrational because it's a decimal that never ends, never repeats, and never terminates. So it's irrational. However, if you take the square root of 36, the square root of 36 gives you 6. Therefore, this is a perfect square because when you square root it, you get a nice integer number. When you take the square root of 20, you don't get a nice integer. So let's try that. Square root of 20 is 4.472. Ugh, that's also irrational. My decimal never ends, never repeats, never terminates. So that's approximately 4.47. Again, this one's also irrational. Okay, but if we do square root of 49 and the square root of 100, square root of 49 equals 7. Nice, our answer is a perfect integer. The square root of 100 is 10. Nice. So another test you can do is to try taking the square root and see what happens. Alright, so to sum up, what is a perfect square? Well, a perfect square number can be represented geometrically. Right? If you take the number 9 and you can actually physically create a perfect square with those 9 units, you're in good shape. If you can form a rectangle, then it's not a perfect square. Analytically, if we're trying to figure out a way we could solve if the answer to is it a perfect square using our calculator, you can take the square root of the number. If you get a nice integer, like we did here, here, and here, an integer answer, it means that the number is a perfect square. If you get something that's not an integer, if it's irrational, then what you started with is not a perfect square. So here's a little list of perfect square numbers. It's kind of long, and there are a lot more. There are an infinite number of perfect squares, but remember the perfect squares are these guys. They're what you get when you square a number. So this list goes up to 841. So what this means is 841, if we had 841 units, we could make a perfect square. That would be 841 units squared, and each side of the square would be 29 units long. Okay? So there's our geometric, there's our analytic. I hope this helps.